I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd end up owning a nursing home, especially not the one housing my mother-in-law. Life has a strange way of bringing things full circle, doesn't it? My name is Elyse Mitchell, formerly Elyse Winters, and 5 years ago, I was standing at the altar in a dress that cost more than my first car, listening to my soon-to-be mother-in-law call me a gold digger in front of 200 guests. I met James Mitchell during my second year working at Portland General Hospital. I was a registered nurse pulling double shifts in the ICU, running on coffee and determination, while he was the new attending physician who transferred from Seattle Grace. I still remember the first time I saw him, tall with kind eyes and an easy smile that somehow made 12-hour shifts feel bearable. He had this way of talking to patients that made them feel like they were the only person in the room. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Our paths crossed constantly, professionally at first. Coffee breaks spent discussing difficult cases turned into lunch breaks exchanging stories about our lives. I told him about growing up in a small town outside Portland, being raised by a single mom who worked 3 jobs to put me through nursing school. He talked about his privileged upbringing in Lake Oswego, private schools, and the constant pressure from his mother, Victoria, to follow in his late father's footsteps into medicine. She had my whole life planned before I was born. He told me one evening as we shared takeout in the break room, the right schools, the right specialty, the right kind of woman to marry. Someone from a good family with the right connections. I laughed, gesturing to my scrubs stained with who knows what after a particularly rough shift. I'm guessing this isn't what she had in mind? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said, "No, but it's exactly what I want." 3 months later, we were dating. 6 months after that, I moved into his downtown condo, and a year to the day from our first date, he proposed on the rooftop garden of that same hospital where we met, down on one knee with his grandmother's diamond ring. "My father gave me this before he died," he said, his voice catching. "He told me to give it to someone who made me feel the way my mother never made him feel, valued for who I am, not what I represent." I said yes through tears, and for one perfect moment, everything felt right. Then came the phone call to his mother. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Victoria Mitchell lived in a sprawling Tudor-style mansion in the West Hills, the kind of place that appeared in architectural magazines and made you feel underdressed just walking up the driveway. James insisted we tell her our news in person, so the following Sunday, we drove up that intimidating driveway, his hand squeezing mine reassuringly. "It'll be fine," he said, but the tension in his jaw told me he didn't believe it. Victoria opened the door herself, though I knew she had household staff. She was slender and elegant in a way that seemed effortless, but I was certain took considerable effort. Perfectly styled silver blonde hair, tailored clothes, and jewelry that whispered, "Old money." She kissed James on both cheeks before turning her gaze to me. "James, darling," she said without taking her eyes off me. "I wasn't aware you were bringing a guest." "Mother, you remember Elyse. I told you we've been seeing each other." "Of course," she replied with a smile that never reached her eyes. "The nurse." The way she said nurse made it sound like I collected garbage for a living. I extended my hand, determined to start things off right. "It's lovely to see you again, Mrs. Mitchell." She barely touched my fingers before withdrawing her hand and turning away. "Come in. Tea is already set in the parlor." The parlor was larger than my childhood home, filled with antiques I was afraid to breathe near. Victoria directed James to sit beside her on an ornate sofa while I was left to perch, awkwardly on a high-backed chair across from them. "Mother," James began after an uncomfortable silence, "Elyse and I have some news." He reached across the coffee table for my hand. "We're engaged." Victoria's teacup froze halfway to her lips. I beg your pardon? We're getting married, he repeated, his smile strained but determined. She carefully set her cup down, the soft clink against the saucer echoing in the silent room. James, don't be ridiculous. You've only known this woman for what, a few months? A year and a half, actually, I corrected quietly. Victoria's eyes flicked to me, cold and dismissive, before returning to her son. Regardless, this is not something to rush into. Why don't you take some time to reconsider? Perhaps after your fellowship. I'm not reconsidering, James interrupted. I love Elyse, and we're getting married next spring. Something in Victoria's expression hardened. May I speak with you privately, James? He squeezed my hand. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Elyse. Victoria sat straighter, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her silk blouse. Very well. Have you considered what people will say? The Prescott's daughter has been asking about you, you know. Caroline, from the right family, proper education, connections that would benefit your career. Instead, you bring home... She gestured vaguely in my direction. A nurse from nowhere who probably sees you as her ticket out of middle-class obscurity. My cheeks burned. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm not finished, she cut me off. James has prospects, a legacy to uphold. His father built a reputation in this community that took decades. Do you really think you're equipped to be a part of that world? To represent the Mitchell name at charity galas and hospital board meetings? Mother, stop it, James snapped. But Victoria wasn't done. She turned to me, her gaze clinical and cold. What do your parents do, Elyse? Where did you attend university? Do you have any family connections in Portland? My mother is a bookkeeper for a local construction company, I replied, straightening my spine. My father left when I was 3. I worked my way through community college and nursing school at Portland State with scholarships and student loans that I'm still paying off. And no, I don't have connections, but I save lives alongside your son every day. And I love him for who he is, not his last name. Victoria's laugh was short and brittle. How charmingly direct. James, darling, I understand the appeal of a different sort of relationship. Your father went through something similar before we met. But marriage? To someone so clearly after financial security? That's enough. James stood abruptly. Elyse is the woman I'm going to marry, with or without your blessing. I had hoped you'd at least try to know her, but I see that was expecting too much. He took my hand, pulling me to my feet. We're leaving. James Mitchell, if you walk out that door with this girl, you can forget about accessing your trust fund. Early for that practice you wanted to start. Your father was very specific about the conditions. He didn't even turn around. Keep it. We drove in silence for several minutes before James pulled over on a scenic overlook above the city. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I'm so sorry, he finally said. I knew she would be difficult, but that was beyond what I expected. I was still processing everything. The beautiful home so full of coldness, the casual cruelty, the way Victoria had looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her expensive shoe. She thinks I'm a gold digger, I said quietly. James turned to me, his expression fierce. She's wrong. She's wrong about everything, and I don't care what she thinks. I love you, and nothing she says changes that. But your trust fund, the practice, you wanted to start... We'll figure it out, he interrupted. I don't need her money. We'll save, get loans if we have to. All I need is you. I believed him. Maybe that was naive, but I looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. He chose me over family money, over his mother's approval, over the path that had been laid out for him since birth. We went ahead with the wedding plans, though we scaled back considerably from what James had initially suggested. No lavish country, club reception, or designer gown. Instead, we found a charming historic hotel downtown with a garden terrace for the ceremony. I bought a simple dress off the rack and splurged only on the photographer, because James said those memories would matter most. For 6 months, we heard nothing from Victoria, though James tried calling several times. Each call went unanswered. We sent an invitation to the wedding anyway. James couldn't bear not to. "She's still my mother," he said. "Maybe by then she'll have come around." I wasn't so sure, but I supported him. Meanwhile, I was getting to know his friends, many from wealthy families like his, most of whom welcomed me warmly. But there were a few, particularly those who knew Victoria well, who regarded me with the same suspicion she had, as though I'd somehow tricked James into proposing. Rebecca Prescott, Caroline's mother, cornered me at a charity auction James had been invited to. "Such a surprise, your engagement," she said, examining me over the rim of her champagne flute. Victoria was so certain James would end up with Caroline. They've known each other since childhood, you know, and have so much in common. Similar backgrounds are so important for a lasting marriage. "James and I have what matters in common," I replied with a politeness I didn't feel. "Values, goals, mutual respect." "How modern," she said with a thin smile. "I do hope it's enough when the novelty wears off." Comments like these hurt, but they also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't going to become defensive or bitter. I would show them all through actions, not words, that I loved James for who he was, not what he had. The day before our wedding, as I was doing the final walkthrough at the venue, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Elyse Winters?" A woman's crisp voice asked when I answered. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Margot Wheeler, Victoria Mitchell's personal assistant. Mrs. Mitchell would like to speak with you. Are you available to meet this afternoon?" My heart jumped to my throat. After months of silence, why now? "I'm quite busy with wedding preparations. Mrs. Mitchell is aware of tomorrow's event. She insists it's important and won't take much of your time. The Heathman Hotel, 4 o'clock. She'll be in the tea room." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood there staring at my phone, torn between hope and dread. Should I tell James? No. If this went badly, it would only cast a shadow over our wedding day. And if by some miracle Victoria wanted to reconcile, what a gift that would be to surprise him with. At precisely 4 o'clock, I walked into the elegant tea room of the Heathman Hotel. Victoria sat at a corner table, impeccable as ever in a pale blue suit, a small gift bag placed neatly beside her saucer. "Elyse," she acknowledged as I sat across from her. "Thank you for coming." "Mrs. Mitchell," I replied cautiously. "This is unexpected." She signaled to the server for a second cup. "I imagine so. I've had time to reflect on our last meeting, and I behaved poorly." She paused as tea was poured. My concern for James may have been expressed inelegantly. Was this an apology? It didn't sound like one, but from Victoria, perhaps this was as close as it got. "I appreciate you saying that," I offered. "James has missed you. It would mean everything to him if you came tomorrow." Victoria stirred her tea with precision. "Yes. Well, that's partly why I wanted to speak with you." She pushed the small gift bag toward me. A wedding present of sorts. Cautiously, I opened it. Inside was a check for $100,000, made out to me, not to us. My name alone. "I don't understand," I said, though a sickening feeling told me I did. "It's very simple. This is for you to walk away. No drama, no messy breakup. Just tell James you've reconsidered, that you're not ready." Young men bounce back quickly from these things, especially with the right support. I stared at her, speechless. "Surely you didn't think this would actually work," she continued. "You and James come from different worlds. Eventually, those differences become insurmountable. I'm offering you a way out that benefits everyone. That amount would clear your student loans, wouldn't it? Perhaps start a little business if you've entrepreneurial inclinations." Anger rose like bile in my throat. I carefully folded the check and placed it back in the bag. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to pretend this conversation never happened, out of respect for James. I'm marrying your son tomorrow because I love him, and he loves me. No amount of money will change that. I stood to leave, but her voice stopped. Me. 200,000 then. My final offer. I turned back, studied her perfectly composed face, and felt a wave of pity. You know so little about love that you think it has a price. That's not a judgment, it's a tragedy. I hope someday you understand what you're missing. Her expression hardened. When this marriage inevitably fails, don't come looking for a bailout. James will always be my son, but you will never be my family. That's James's choice to make, not yours, I replied. Goodbye, Mrs. Mitchell. I truly hope we see you tomorrow. I walked out with my head high, though my hands were shaking. In the sanctuary of my car, I finally let the tears come, not from hurt, but from a profound sadness for James, to have grown up with such conditional love. And yes, for Victoria too, so trapped in her narrow view of what mattered that she would try to buy off her son's happiness. I didn't tell James about the meeting. What would be the point? It would only bring pain on what should be the happiest day of our lives. Instead, I focused on our final preparations and the simple fact that tomorrow, I would marry the man I loved. Our wedding day dawned clear and perfect. One of those rare October days in Portland when the sun shines warmly and the leaves display their most brilliant colors. The historic hotel's garden terrace was transformed with simple arrangements of autumn flowers and twinkling lights strung between maple trees beginning to turn gold and crimson. I was in the bridal suite with my mother and best friend Miranda when the knock came. Miranda answered, then turned to me with a confused expression. There's a Mrs. Wheeler here? Says she's with Victoria Mitchell? My heart stuttered. Margot, Victoria's assistant. Let her in, I said, smoothing my dress nervously. Margot entered, as crisp and efficient as her phone manner had suggested. Miss Winters, Mrs. Mitchell has arrived for the ceremony and wishes to speak with you beforehand. Miranda raised an eyebrow. Is that a good idea? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect this perfect day from Victoria's potential venom. But another part recognized this might be an olive branch, however slim. It's okay, I assured Miranda. Give us a few minutes? Once we were alone, I nodded to Margot. I'll see her. Victoria entered moments later, dressed in an elegant sage green ensemble that probably cost more than our entire wedding. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of me in my wedding dress. A flicker of something. Surprise? Recognition? Crossing. Her features before she regained her composure. You look appropriate, she said, which from her might have been a compliment. Thank you for coming, I replied genuinely. It will mean so much to James. Victoria clasped her hands before her. Yes, well, he is my only child. She paused, surveying the room as though gathering her thoughts. I've brought something. Family tradition. From her clutch, she withdrew a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a pair of pearl earrings with small diamonds in an antique setting. These belonged to James's grandmother. All Mitchell brides have worn them since 1912. She held them out stiffly. For today only, of course. They'll need to be returned after the ceremony for future use. I understood the subtext. She didn't expect this marriage to last, so the earrings would be needed for James's real wife someday. Still, it was a concession, an acknowledgement of the day, if not my permanent place in their family. They're beautiful, I said, accepting the box. Thank you. I spoke with your mother, Victoria continued. She seems dedicated to you. That's commendable. Again, not quite a compliment, but not an insult either. Progress, perhaps. She is, I agreed. Everything I am, I owe to her strength and sacrifices. Victoria nodded. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Well, she finally said, I should take my seat. The mother of the groom has certain obligations. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Victoria. She paused, unused to hearing her first name from my lips. I know you love James. Whatever else is between us, we have that in common. I promise you I'll spend my life making him happy. Something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, resignation, perhaps a grudging respect. She gave a curt nod and left. Exhaled slowly, replacing my simple studs with the Mitchell family pearls. Not peace exactly, but perhaps a ceasefire. The ceremony itself was everything we'd hoped for. Intimate, meaningful, filled with people who truly cared for us. James's eyes when he first saw me walking down the aisle made every struggle worthwhile. We spoke our vows with clear voices and full hearts, promising to stand together through whatever life brought our way. At the reception, Victoria sat at her assigned table, back straight, expression neutral. She didn't mingle much, but responded politely when guests approached her. James spent a few minutes with her, their conversation appearing civil if not warm. I considered it a victory. Then came the toasts. My mother went first, her voice trembling with emotion as she spoke of love and new beginnings. James's residency director followed with amusing stories of our early days at the hospital. Miranda shared memories of my lifelong determination, how I'd worked for everything I had. Finally, the best man, James's childhood friend, Christopher, handed the microphone to Victoria with a flourish. Mrs. Mitchell would like to say a few words. An expectant hush fell over the room. James squeezed my hand under the table. Victoria rose gracefully, surveying the gathered guests with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. For those who don't know me, I'm Victoria Mitchell, James's mother. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the room before landing on us. When James was born, my husband and I had such plans. The best schools, the right connections, a future as bright as his father's had been. She took a measured sip of champagne. He fulfilled many of those expectations. Harvard Medical School, surgical residency, a promising career. But along the way, he developed his father's most inconvenient trait, the tendency to make his own decisions regardless of sound advice. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. James's grip tightened around mine. I had a particular vision for today, Victoria continued. A society wedding at the country club, perhaps? A bride from a family we'd known for generations? Her eyes fixed on me. Instead, he chose differently. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. When James first told me about Elyse, I was concerned. What could a simple nurse from an unremarkable background offer my son that the many accomplished young women in our circle could not? What was the appeal beyond the obvious physical attributes? Murmurs rose from the guests. My mother half rose from her seat before my friend gently restrained her. Mother, James began, his voice low with warning. Victoria waved him off. Let me finish, James. It's a mother's prerogative to speak at her son's wedding. She turned back to the crowd. I decided to observe this relationship, to see what I might have missed. And over these months, despite my reservations, I've watched how this woman looks at my son. Not at his name or his future inheritance, but at him. Victoria's voice took on an odd quality. Not quite warmth, but something less brittle than before. I'm not easily persuaded to change my opinions, as my son will attest. But watching James today, I can acknowledge he appears genuinely happy. She raised her glass. So while I maintain that this union is impulsive and faces considerable challenges given your disparate backgrounds, I will concede that perhaps happiness has its own value. To the bride and groom, may your future prove less precarious than I anticipate. A stunned silence followed before uncertain applause broke out. James was rigid beside me, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Victoria returned to her seat, apparently satisfied with having delivered what she considered a magnanimous speech. In her world, perhaps it was. As the music resumed and guests returned to conversations, trying to pretend the moment hadn't been painfully awkward, I leaned over to James. "It's okay. She tried, in her way." "That wasn't trying," he said through gritted teeth. "That was her making sure everyone knows she disapproves without being quite rude enough to justify asking her to leave." Before I could respond, Victoria appeared beside our table, handbag in hand. "I believe I've fulfilled my obligations," she said coolly. "I'll be leaving now." "That's probably best," James replied, not looking at her. She nodded stiffly. "Congratulations. Again. I've instructed my attorney to release the first portion of your trust fund, despite my misgivings. Consider it my wedding gift, though I suspect it will be primarily used to support your new wife's aspirations to social climbing." That was when something in James snapped. He stood so abruptly, his chair tipped backward. "Enough, Mother. I've tolerated your thinly veiled insults and condescension because you're my mother, and I foolishly hoped you might eventually see Elyse for the incredible woman she is. But I'm done." Guests at nearby tables were watching with undisguised interest. "James, lower your voice," Victoria hissed. "People are staring." "Let them," he replied. "Let everyone hear me say that I love my wife. And if you can't respect her, then you don't respect me. You can keep the trust fund. Keep all of it. We don't want or need your money." Victoria's composure slipped, genuine shock crossing her features. "Don't be ridiculous. You've worked toward opening that practice for years. And I'll get there, with or without your help. But I won't accept financial support that comes with the condition that I tolerate my wife being insulted." I stood, placing a hand on his arm. "James, please, it's our wedding day." Victoria looked between us, her expression calculating. Then, in a voice just loud enough to carry to the surrounding tables, she said, "My son always had a weakness for a pretty face. I suppose I should be grateful you managed to secure the ring before getting pregnant. That's usually how these arrangements work, isn't it? The gold digger's insurance policy?" Gasps rippled through our guests. My mother was on her feet instantly. James went absolutely still, a kind of cold fury I'd never seen before settling over his features. "Get out," he said quietly. "Now." Victoria lifted her chin. "Happily. When this inevitably ends, don't come crawling back expecting sympathy." She turned her gaze to me. "And you? Remember I offered you an easier exit. You should have taken it." With that, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking precisely on the hardwood floor, leaving a devastated silence in her wake. I stood frozen, humiliation burning through me. 200 guests had just heard my mother-in-law call me a gold digger at my own wedding. My mother was being restrained by my uncle, her face flushed with rage. James was trembling beside me. Then Miranda's voice cut through the silence. "DJ, music now!" The opening notes of our favorite song filled the room. James turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "Elyse, I'm so sorry. I never thought she would—" I placed my fingers against his lips. "This is still our day. She doesn't get to take that from us." Deliberately, I took his hand and led him to the dance floor. "Dance with me, Dr. Mitchell." For a moment, he hesitated. Then something in his expression cleared. He pulled me close as we began to move to the music. "I love you," he whispered against my hair. "More than anything." "I love you too," I replied. "And that's all that matters." Gradually, our friends and family joined us on the dance floor. The moment hadn't been forgotten, but we were all determined it wouldn't define the day. Hours later, as we drove away amid cheers and flying rice, I realized something important. Victoria Mitchell had shown her true colors to everyone, not just to me. She'd lost far more than she'd realized. What I didn't know then was how her words, would echo through the years to come, or how completely the tables would turn. But that night, newly married and wrapped in James's arms in our hotel suite, I made a silent promise to myself. Someday, somehow, Victoria Mitchell would regret underestimating me. I just never expected that reckoning would come in the form of ownership papers to Pine Meadows luxury senior living, the exclusive nursing home where, 5 years later, she would reluctantly take up residence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The story of how I came to own my mother-in-law's nursing home is complicated, painful, and, in the end, surprisingly satisfying. It begins the morning after our wedding, with a phone call that would change everything. The morning after our wedding, while James was in the shower, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, thinking it might be Victoria again, but something made me pick up. "Hello? Is this Mrs. Mitchell?" asked a woman's voice I didn't recognize. The title still felt strange. "Yes, this is Elyse Mitchell. This is Sandra Harmon from Portland Community Bank. I'm calling about some unusual activity on your joint account with James Mitchell. Could you verify the last 4 digits of your social security number?" A chill ran through me. We'd opened that account just 2 weeks ago to deposit wedding gift checks. "I'm sorry, what unusual activity?" There was an attempt to withdraw the full balance this morning. Our system flagged it because the amount exceeds our daily limit. The request came through our online banking portal. My mind raced. I didn't make any withdrawal request, and my husband is here with me. "I see." Her voice became more formal. "In that case, we've placed a temporary hold on the account. You'll both need to come into the branch with identification to resolve this." After thanking her, I hung up just as James emerged from the bathroom. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing my expression. I explained the call, watching his face darken with each word. "It has to be her," he said flatly. "Mother has access to all my accounts. She insisted on it for emergency purposes when I was in medical school. I never changed the permissions. But this is our joint account. My name is on it too. She probably thought that didn't matter, or that the bank would just see Mitchell and assume." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "I'm so sorry, Elyse. Let me get dressed, and we'll go to the bank right away." The honeymoon suite suddenly felt cold. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what this meant. Victoria hadn't just insulted me at our wedding, she'd attempted to drain our account. The very next day, the violation felt profound. At the bank, a manager escorted us to a private office where we spent an hour going through security procedures and completing paperwork to remove Victoria from all of James's accounts. The attempted withdrawal had been for $31,240, our entire balance, mostly wedding gifts and the deposit for a small house we'd been saving for. "I can't believe she would do this," James kept saying, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Even for her, this crosses a line." The bank manager, a kind woman in her 50s, gave us a sympathetic smile. "Unfortunately, we see this kind of thing more often than you'd think. Family disputes over money can bring out the worst in people." "She doesn't even need the money," James said bitterly. "She has millions. This was just to hurt us." After securing our accounts and filing a report, we returned to the hotel. Our flight to Hawaii for our honeymoon wasn't until the next day, but the carefree joy I'd felt that morning had evaporated. "I should call her," James said as we entered our suite. "Confront her about this." I touched his arm. "Is that what you really want on our first day as husband and wife? To have another fight with your mother?" He hesitated, conflict evident in his eyes. "No. But we can't just pretend this didn't happen." "We won't," I assured him. "But right now, this day still belongs to us. Let's not give her any more of it than she's already taken." After a moment, he nodded. "You're right. She's already ruined enough. But when we get back from Hawaii, I'm going to have a serious conversation with her." That conversation never happened. While we were in Hawaii, a blissful week of beaches and sunsets and making love with the balcony doors open to the ocean breeze, Victoria left for an extended trip to Europe. By the time she returned 3 months later, our lives had changed, in ways none of us could have anticipated. We'd been back from our honeymoon for 2 weeks when James started experiencing unusual fatigue. At first, we attributed it to long shifts at the hospital and the stress of the wedding drama. But when he developed persistent night sweats and unexplained bruising, my nursing instincts kicked into high alert. "You need to get checked out," I insisted one morning after finding yet another mysterious bruise on his arm. "Today. No excuses." James reluctantly agreed. That afternoon, he had blood drawn at the hospital where we both worked. The next day, his colleague and friend Dr. Patel called him into her office. I knew something was terribly wrong when James came home early, his face ashen. He sat me down on our couch, his hands trembling as they held mine. "It's leukemia," he said, his voice barely audible. "Acute myeloid leukemia. Mira wants to admit me tomorrow to start treatment." The world collapsed around me. James was 34, healthy, strong. This couldn't be happening. "Are they sure?" I asked stupidly. "Maybe it's a mistake." They ran the tests twice. His grip on my hands tightened. "Elyse, it's aggressive. The blast cells are already at 60%. I knew enough from my nursing background to understand what that meant. High blast count, aggressive presentation, James needed treatment immediately. All thoughts of Victoria and wedding drama vanished as we entered a new battlefield together. Tea. Next morning, I helped James pack a bag for the hospital. As an oncology nurse pulled up his sleeve to insert an IV, I saw her eyes widen at the bruises mottling his arm. Within hours, he had a central line placed and was receiving his first dose of chemotherapy. Our life together had barely begun, and already we were fighting for it to continue. Dr. Patel, Mira, sat us down to discuss the treatment plan. "We'll start with intensive induction therapy, 7 days of cytarabine and 3 days of idarubicin. If you achieve remission, we'll move to consolidation therapy." James nodded, the doctor in him taking over. "And if induction fails?" Mira hesitated. "Let's focus on one step at a time, James. Your age and general health are in your favor." But I saw the concern in her eyes. Both James and I knew the statistics for AML with his genetic markers weren't good. As night fell on that first day of treatment, I sat beside his hospital bed, watching medication drip into his veins. He dozed fitfully, already experiencing the early side effects. I held his hand and made a silent promise to whatever forces might be listening. I would do anything, to keep him alive. Someone needed to tell Victoria. Despite everything, she deserved to know her son had cancer. James was in no state to make that call, so the task fell to me. "Mrs. Mitchell," I said when she answered on the third ring. "It's Elyse." "I have nothing to say to you," she replied, coldly. "This isn't about me. It's James. He's in the hospital." A beat of silence. "What happened?" "He's been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. He started chemotherapy today." Another silence, longer this time. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had lost its edge. "Which hospital?" "Portland General. 7th floor, room 7-12. I'll be there in the morning." She hung up without another word. I didn't tell James I'd called her. He needed rest, not the anxiety of anticipating his mother's arrival. But the next morning, as I returned from the cafeteria, with coffee, I found Victoria standing outside his room, speaking with Dr. Patel. She wore a simple gray suit rather than her usual ostentatious attire, her face drawn and pale. When she saw me, something flashed in her eyes. Not quite hostility, but wariness. "Elyse," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Victoria. Thank you for coming." Dr. Patel excused herself, leaving us alone in the hallway. "How is he?" Victoria asked, her voice carefully controlled. Sick. The chemotherapy is already hitting hard. They've given him anti-nausea medication, but it's not helping much. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the closed door. The doctor says his prognosis is concerning. It's serious, I confirmed. But James is strong, and they're being aggressive. With treatment. Victoria's eyes finally met mine. I want to bring in specialists, the best oncologists in the country. Cost is no object. For once, I didn't bristle at her implicit suggestion that money could solve everything. If there was ever a time when her resources might help, it was now. Dr. Patel is excellent, I said. But yes, second opinions would be good. James would need to agree, though. Of course. She smoothed her already immaculate jacket. May I see him now? I hesitated. Victoria, he looks different already, and he's going to get worse before he gets better. The treatment is brutal. I understand. Her voice was firm, but I detected a slight tremor. He's my son. I nodded and opened the door. James was dozing, his skin already taking on the pallor characteristic of chemotherapy patients. An anti-nausea medication dripped into his central line alongside the chemotherapy drugs. He stirred as we entered, his eyes widening when he saw his mother. Mom? Victoria moved to his bedside with uncharacteristic uncertainty. James. I came as soon as I heard. He glanced at me, understanding dawning. Elyse called you. Yes. Victoria perched on the edge of the visitor's chair. Your doctor has been explaining the situation. I'd like to arrange consultations with specialists. Dr. Branson at Mayo Clinic was your father's classmate. He could— Mom, James interrupted gently. I have a good team here. Mira knows what she's doing. Victoria pressed her lips together but didn't argue. Instead, she reached out and, with visible hesitation, placed her hand over his. What do you need from me? It was perhaps the first time I'd ever heard her ask that question without an agenda. James's eyes met mine across the room, filled with a complexity of emotions. Just be here, he told his mother, and try to get along with my wife. She's going to need support too. Victoria glanced at me, then back to James. I'll try. And remarkably, she did try, in her own limited way. Over the following weeks, as James endured the brutal first round of chemotherapy, Victoria became a regular presence at the hospital. She never stayed overnight. That role belonged to me. But she appeared each morning at 9, immaculately dressed, carrying fresh flowers or books or specialty foods that might tempt James's non-existent appetite. She and I established an uneasy truce. We rarely spoke directly to each other, communicating primarily through James or the medical staff. But occasionally, when James was sleeping, we'd find ourselves alone in his room, the beeping of monitors the only sound. During one such moment, about 3 weeks into treatment, Victoria broke our usual silence. He's always been stubborn, she said, her eyes on James's sleeping form. Even as a child, once he decided on something, nothing could dissuade him. I looked up from the medical journal I'd been pretending to read. That served him well as a doctor. Yes. His father was the same way. She adjusted the sleeve of her blouse. Richard knew his own mind. It was one of the things I initially respected about him. Not loved, I noted. Respected. James told me his father died of a heart attack, I said carefully. Victoria nodded. 10 years ago, it was sudden. Something in her tone made me look closer. Her perfectly manicured hands fidgeted uncharacteristically with her watch band. You miss him, I observed, surprising myself with the insight. She stiffened. He was my husband for 30 years. Not a yes, but not a denial either. For Victoria, it was practically an emotional confession. Before I could respond, James stirred, ending the moment. But something had shifted, however slightly. We'd acknowledged, however obliquely, that we were both people who loved the man in that hospital bed, each in our own way. The first round of chemotherapy ended. A bone marrow biopsy showed the leukemia was still present but reduced. Not the complete remission we'd hoped for, but enough improvement to proceed with a second round. James was allowed to go home for 10 days between treatments. Our apartment became a sterile zone. Visitors had to wear masks, no fresh flowers or fruits were allowed, everything was disinfected multiple times daily. His immune system was virtually non-existent. On the third day home, Victoria appeared at our door carrying several shopping bags. "I've brought some things," she announced, brushing past me into the apartment. "Organic bone broth from that specialty market on 23rd. Air purifiers for each room, the medical-grade ones they use in isolation wards, and some silk pajamas. Hospital cotton is dreadful on sensitive skin, and the chemo will make his worse." I stood speechless as she unpacked her items with brisk efficiency. Everything she'd brought was useful, thoughtful even, if characteristically expensive. But what struck me most was that she'd clearly researched what a chemotherapy patient might need. "Thank you," I said finally. "That's very kind." Victoria paused, seeming almost embarrassed by my gratitude. "Yes, well, where is he?" "Resting in the bedroom. He had a rough night." She nodded. "I won't disturb him then. The broth should be heated gently, not microwaved. It maintains more nutrients that way." She turned to leave, then hesitated at the door. "Has Dr. Patel discussed transplant options yet?" She mentioned it might be necessary if the second round doesn't achieve remission. My stomach knotted at the thought. Bone marrow transplants were risky, with no guarantee of success. "I've been tested," Victoria said. "As his mother, I might be a match. The results should come tomorrow." I blinked in surprise. "You didn't mention you were getting tested?" It didn't seem necessary to announce. She adjusted her handbag on her arm. "Call if he needs anything, day or night." With that, she left, leaving me to process this new development. Victoria Mitchell, who had tried to empty our bank account and called me a gold digger at our wedding, had voluntarily been tested as a bone marrow donor for her son. People, I was learning, could contain multitudes of contradictions. The second round of chemotherapy was worse than the first. James lost his hair, his appetite, and 20 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. He developed mouth sores so severe he could barely speak. Infections sent his temperature soaring repeatedly, each one a life-threatening crisis. Through it all, Victoria and I maintained our fragile truce, united in our determination to see James through this ordeal. She wasn't affectionate or particularly kind to me, but she was no longer actively hostile. When I needed to go home to shower or change clothes, she stayed with James. When she had to attend a board meeting, I assured her I'd call if anything changed. The results from the bone marrow registry came back. Victoria was not a compatible donor. Neither was I. None of James's few relatives who were tested matched either. "We'll search the national registry," Dr. Patel told us. "But I want to be honest. Finding a perfect match can be difficult, and James's markers are uncommon." Victoria immediately offered to fund a private search to compensate donors, to fly potential matches in from anywhere in the world. Dr. Patel gently explained that wasn't how the system worked. "But there must be something money can do," Victoria insisted, her voice rising with rare emotion. "There's always something money can fix." It was the first time I'd seen her facade crack completely. In that moment, she wasn't Victoria Mitchell, society matriarch and guardian of the family legacy. She was simply a mother terrified of losing her child. I found myself touching her arm. "Victoria, the doctors are doing everything possible. Some things are beyond even your control." She pulled away sharply, composure returning. I refused to accept that. But reality didn't bend to Victoria's will. The second round of chemotherapy ended with minimal improvement. The cancer cells were proving resistant to treatment. Dr. Patel recommended a clinical trial using an experimental combination therapy. It's aggressive, she warned. The side effects will be significant, but given the resistance we're seeing, it may be our best option while we search for a transplant match. James, thin and pale but still determined, nodded. When do we start? There's a complication, Dr. Patel said, her expression grave. Your insurance is denying coverage for the trial. They're classifying it as experimental and outside their payment parameters. That's ridiculous, I protested. This is a life or death situation. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon. We're appealing, but the process can take weeks. How much? Victoria interrupted. Dr. Patel hesitated. The medication alone is approximately $147,000 per treatment cycle. With hospitalization costs, supportive care, management of side effects, you're looking at close to $300,000 for the full course. I felt the blood drain from my face. Even if we emptied our savings, sold our car, maxed out every credit card, we might cover 1/10 of that amount. Fine, Victoria said without hesitation. I'll wire the money today. Get whatever paperwork ready. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a complex tangle of emotions: gratitude, resentment, humiliation. Once again, Victoria's wealth was saving the day, reinforcing the very dynamic she'd accused me of exploiting. That night, after James had finally fallen asleep, I found Victoria in the hospital cafeteria, methodically picking at a salad that looked like it had been sitting under the heat lamps too long. May I join you? I asked. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. If you wish. I sat, cradling a cup of mediocre coffee. Thank you. For the money for the trial. We couldn't have... Stop, she interrupted. I didn't do it for you. I did it for James. I know that, but I'm still grateful. She set down her fork. Do you know why I was so opposed to your marriage? The abrupt question caught me off guard. Because I'm not from your social circle. Because I'm a nurse, not a doctor or lawyer. Because my mother is a bookkeeper instead of a socialite. Partially, she conceded. But primarily because I saw how James looked at you. Like you'd given him permission to be himself, not the son I'd molded so carefully. She took a sip of water. It terrified me. Why? Because it meant I was losing control. Of him, of the legacy Richard and I built. She dabbed her lips with a napkin. I've controlled everything in my life, Elyse. My marriage, my social standing, my son's education. Control is how I've survived. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. And now? I asked quietly. Her eyes, so like James's, met mine with unusual directness. Now I'm sitting in a hospital cafeteria at 10 o'clock at night, eating a Thai, dreadful salad, watching my only child fight for his life, and realizing I control absolutely nothing that truly matters. The raw vulnerability in her voice struck me deeply. For the first time, I saw past the polished exterior to the frightened human beneath. None of us do, I said finally. We just pretend we do until something like this happens. Victoria nodded. A barely perceptible movement. Yes. Well? She gathered her things, mask firmly back in place. You should get some rest. James will need you tomorrow. As she walked away, her expensive heels clicking on the linoleum floor, I realized something important. Victoria Mitchell was not a monster. She was a deeply flawed, emotionally stunted woman who had built her entire identity around appearances and control. And now, watching her son fight for his life, those foundations were crumbling. I didn't know then how much further those foundations would crumble, or how Victoria's need for control would eventually lead to her downfall. I couldn't have imagined that 3 years later, I would be signing ownership papers for Pine Meadows Luxury Senior Living, where Victoria would become my most reluctant resident. All I knew that night was that the battle for James's life had only just begun, and that it would change all of us in ways we couldn't yet comprehend. The experimental treatment was brutal. James's already weakened body revolted against the powerful cocktail of drugs. His temperature spiked to 104 degrees the second night, his organs threatening to shut down as the medical team packed him in ice and pumped him full of antibiotics. I stayed by his side for 36 straight hours, terrified that if I left, even to shower, he might slip away. Victoria appeared each morning, her face increasingly drawn but her appearance still impeccable, armor against the chaos unfolding around her. One particularly bad morning, she arrived to find James unconscious, a ventilator breathing for him after his lungs had filled with fluid overnight. "Why wasn't I called?" she demanded, her voice tight. "Everything happened so fast," I explained, my own voice hoarse from exhaustion. "They had to intubate him immediately. I've been helping the nurses turn him to prevent pneumonia." She stared at her son, so still, so unlike the vibrant man we both loved. And for the first time since I'd known her, Victoria Mitchell's perfect composure crumbled. Her shoulders sagged, and she sank into the chair beside the bed, one manicured hand covering her mouth. "He looks like Richard," she whispered. "At the end." I froze. "I thought your husband died of a sudden heart attack." She shook her head slightly, eyes never leaving James. "That's what we told everyone. It was simpler. The truth was messier." "What was the truth?" I asked quietly. Victoria was silent for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, as if coming from somewhere deep in the past. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it. He went from healthy to," she gestured toward James, "to this, in 3 months." Understanding dawned. "That's why this is hitting you so hard. You've been through this before." Her eyes finally met mine, filled with a raw pain I'd never seen there. "I watched my husband die by inches, Elyse. I cannot, will not, do the same with my son." In that moment, I glimpsed the woman beneath the polished exterior, someone who had already endured the unendurable once and was facing it again. Not that it excused her behavior toward me, but it offered context I hadn't had before. "James is younger and stronger than his father was," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "And medicine has advanced. This treatment is a shot in the dark," she finished flatly. "Don't lie to me. I've spoken with the doctors. I know the odds. They weren't good. James's particular genetic mutation made his leukemia exceptionally aggressive and resistant to standard treatments. The clinical trial was showing promise in similar cases, but promise was a fragile word in oncology. Then, we find something else," I insisted. "Another trial, a different approach. There's research happening all over the world." Victoria studied me, something shifting in her expression. "You really do love him, don't you? It's not about his name or his potential inheritance. You just love my son." The question stung, even now. "I've never loved anyone the way I love James. If I could trade places with him, I would do it in a heartbeat." She nodded slowly. "I believe you." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a sleek leather portfolio. "Which is why I want to show you this." Inside was a stack of papers, medical journals, research summaries, correspondence with doctors around the world. Victoria had been doing her own research, reaching out to specialists, investigating every possible treatment option. "There's a doctor in Stockholm," she said, pointing to one paper. "He's working with modified stem cells that target James's specific mutation. It's still experimental, not even in official trials yet, but his early results are promising." I leafed through the materials, hope flickering. "Have you spoken with him?" Yes, he's willing to review James's case, but treatment would mean going to Sweden for at least 6 months. She hesitated. I've taken the liberty of making preliminary arrangements, housing, medical transport, necessary approvals. If you agree, we could leave as soon as James is stable enough to travel. I blinked, caught off guard by her presumption, but too desperate to be offended. Does Dr. Patel know about this? I spoke with her yesterday. She's cautiously supportive, though she emphasized the risks of both the treatment and the transport. The cost must be astronomical. Victoria waved a dismissive hand. Irrelevant. The Mitchell Foundation will cover everything. Medical expenses, housing, transportation, even income replacement since you'd need to take leave from work. I looked back at James, so still on the hospital bed. If there was even a chance. I need to research this doctor myself, I said finally. Speak with Dr. Patel, and James needs to be conscious enough to have a say. Victoria nodded. Of course. I wouldn't expect anything less. Over the next week, as James's condition stabilized, enough to remove the ventilator, I threw myself into researching Dr. Thomas Lindgren and his experimental treatment. His credentials were impeccable, his research methodology sound. Most importantly, he'd had success with cases similar to James's. Not cures necessarily, but significant remissions. James, weak but alert, listened as we presented the option. Sweden, he said, his voice raspy from the breathing tube. For 6 months. At minimum, I confirmed. It would mean putting everything on hold. Your residency, my job. But Dr. Lindgren's results are the most promising I've seen for your specific mutation. He closed his eyes briefly. And Mom's paying for everything? The foundation is, Victoria corrected from the doorway. She'd been giving us space to discuss. It's what it was established for, medical research and treatment. James looked at me, his sunken eyes serious. What do you think? Honestly. I took his hand, careful of the IV lines. I think it's the best chance we have. Dr. Patel agrees, but it's your body, your life. It has to be your decision. He nodded slowly. When can we leave? 3 weeks later, a private medical transport plane touched down in Stockholm. James had rallied enough to travel, though he needed a wheelchair and supplemental oxygen. Victoria had arranged everything. A fully furnished apartment near the hospital, a car service, even a translator, though Dr. Lindgren and his team spoke perfect English. The next 6 months became a blur of hospital visits, treatment protocols, bad days and slightly less bad days. James's body, already ravaged by previous treatments, struggled with the intensive regimen. But gradually, incrementally, the blast cells in his blood began to decrease. Through it all, Victoria remained in Stockholm, staying in a hotel suite nearby. She didn't hover, giving James and me the space of our apartment, but she appeared each morning to accompany us to the hospital and often joined us for dinner in the evening. It was the most time I'd ever spent in her company, and despite our history, we established a functioning relationship based on our shared commitment to James's recovery. One evening, about 4 months into our stay, James was sleeping after a particularly difficult treatment day. I'd stepped out onto the small balcony of our apartment for some fresh air when Victoria arrived with takeout from a local restaurant. He's resting, I told her softly. Today was rough. She nodded, setting the food containers on the kitchen counter. Dr. Lindgren mentioned they increased the protocol intensity. Did he keep anything down? A little broth at lunch. Nothing since. She sighed, joining me on the balcony. The Stockholm. Evening was crisp and clear, stars appearing in the darkening sky. We stood in companionable silence for several minutes. When James was 7, Victoria said suddenly, he fell out of a tree in our backyard and broke his arm. It was the first time he'd ever been seriously hurt. I remember feeling so helpless. All my money, all my connections, and I couldn't take away his pain. I glanced at her profile, surprised by the personal story. I wanted to tear down every tree in the yard, she continued. Remove any possibility of him being hurt again. Richard told me I was being ridiculous, that boys needed to climb trees and take risks. A faint smile touched her lips. He was right, of course, but that feeling, that desperate need to protect him, never went away. I understand that now, I said quietly. These past months, I felt the same way. She nodded. It's different, though. You're protecting him by being here, holding his hand through every treatment, cleaning up when he's sick, making sure he takes his medications. I'm writing checks from thousands of miles away. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Money is the only way I know how to help. It's the only language I really speak. The admission startled me with its honesty. That's not entirely true. You found? Dr. Lindgren, you arranged everything. You've been here every day. Because I'm terrified of losing him. Her voice cracked slightly on the words. He's all I have left. In that moment, Victoria seemed suddenly older, smaller somehow. I realized she was in her early 60s, not elderly, but no longer young, and visibly worn down by the strain of the past months. He's not all you have, I said carefully. You have your friends, your social circle, acquaintances, she corrected. People who want something from me, my money, my influence, my approval, not friends. What about your sister in Connecticut? James had mentioned an aunt once. Victoria's mouth tightened. Margaret and I haven't spoken in 15 years. A disagreement over our mother's care. She looked out over the Stockholm skyline. Another failure of mine. It was the most vulnerable I'd ever seen her. Standing there in the fading light, she seemed less like the formidable Victoria Mitchell and more like a lonely woman confronting her mortality and the choices that had isolated her. Before I could respond, a sound from inside caught our attention. James calling weakly. We both moved immediately, the moment broken. By the 6-month mark, Dr. Lindgren delivered the news we'd been desperate to hear. James was in remission. Not cured. AML like his was rarely completely defeated, but the cancer cells had retreated to undetectable levels. We'll need to monitor closely, he cautioned. Monthly checks for the first year, then quarterly. At the first sign of recurrence, we would need to begin treatment immediately. Can we return to Portland? I asked, gripping James's hand. Yes, but I would recommend a relationship with an oncologist there who is familiar with our protocols. I'm happy to consult remotely. Victoria, who had been silent during the meeting, finally spoke. I've already spoken with Dr. Carlin at UCLA. She's worked with your methods before and is willing to coordinate James's ongoing care in conjunction with local physicians in Portland. Dr. Lindgren nodded approvingly. Excellent choice. I know Sophia well. Later, as we packed our belongings in the apartment that had been our home for half a year, James looked better than he had in months. Still thin, still tired easily, but the gray pallor had given way to healthier color, and his hair was beginning to grow back, darker and curlier than before. What happens when we get home? He asked, watching me fold clothes into our suitcase. Paused. What do you mean? With us and my mother? These past months you two have been different with each other, almost friendly. Will that continue back in Portland? It was a good question. Victoria and I had established a truce in the crisis of his illness, but would it hold in the return to normal life? I don't know, I admitted. Your mother and I will never be best friends, but I think we've reached an understanding. She loves you in her way. That's something we share. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, a gesture that would have been impossible in the worst days of his illness. Thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me. For coming to Sweden. For trying with her. I turned in his embrace, still careful with his fragile body. I'd do it all again. Every second. We returned to Portland in early spring. Victoria had arranged for our apartment to be professionally cleaned before our arrival, the refrigerator stocked with organic produce, and the specialized foods James's recovering system could tolerate. It was typical Victoria, practical, expensive, and impersonal. But there was also a handwritten note on our kitchen counter. I've taken the liberty of scheduling home nursing care for the next month to assist during the transition. The nurse will arrive each morning at 9 a.m. and stay until 6 p.m. This should allow Elyse to rest and attend to her own needs while ensuring James has proper care. If this arrangement is unsatisfactory, please let me know. Victoria James read the note over my shoulder. That's actually thoughtful. It is, I agreed, surprised. The old Victoria would have insisted James come stay at her mansion for his recovery, separating him from me. This was different, recognizing our marriage while still offering practical help. The next day, the home care nurse arrived. Angela, an experienced oncology nurse with a gentle manner and competent hands. While I'd initially bristled at the implication I couldn't care for my husband alone, I soon realized what a gift the help was. For the first time in over a year, I could shower without rushing, nap when exhaustion overtook me, even step out for coffee without anxiety. A week after our return, Victoria invited us to dinner at her home. James was stronger but still tired easily, so she arranged for her chef to prepare foods that matched his restricted diet and scheduled the meal for early evening when his energy was highest. The mansion looked exactly as I remembered it from our disastrous pre-wedding visit, yet somehow felt different. Perhaps it was my perspective that had changed. Victoria greeted us in the foyer, kissing James's cheek and nodding politely to me. "You're looking better," she told him, her critical eye assessing his thin frame. "Still too pale, but better." "I feel better," he assured her. "Stronger every day." She led us not to the formal dining room, but to a smaller, more intimate space. A breakfast nook overlooking the garden, now blooming with spring flowers. The table was set simply by Victoria's standards, though the dishes were still fine china, and the crystal gleamed. Throughout dinner, she asked detailed questions about James's recovery plan, his medication schedule, his follow-up appointments. She never once mentioned his returning to work or her expectations for his future. Instead, she focused entirely on his health and comfort. As James excused himself briefly, she turned to me. "The home nurse is working out?" I nodded. "Angela is." "Wonderful. Thank you. I didn't realize how exhausted I was until I had help." "Caregiver burnout is real," she said matter-of-factly. "You're no good to James if you collapse from exhaustion." "No, I suppose not." She took a careful sip of water. "I've been thinking about what happens next. James won't be able to return to his previous position for some time, if ever. The physical demands of surgery are too great in his condition." My stomach tightened. This was the Victoria I knew, planning, controlling, deciding James's future. "He needs time to recover before making any career decisions." "Of course, but eventually, decisions will need to be made." She hesitated, uncharacteristically. "I have a proposal I'd like to discuss with both of you, but I wanted to approach you first, as it involves you as well." "What kind of proposal?" I asked warily. "The Mitchell Foundation has a healthcare division that funds research and treatment facilities. We've been considering establishing a specialized oncology clinic focusing on difficult-to-treat blood cancers. It would be associated with Portland General but operate independently." I wasn't sure where she was going with this. "That sounds worthwhile. James could serve as medical director once he's fully recovered. It would utilize his medical expertise without the physical demands of surgery. And," she added, meeting my eyes directly, "we would need an experienced oncology nurse to coordinate patient care. Someone who understands both the medical and emotional aspects of cancer treatment." I stared at her. "Are you offering me a job?" I'm suggesting a possibility for both of you. A way to use your experiences to help others while providing James with meaningful work that accommodates his health needs. She straightened a fork that was already perfectly aligned with the others. It would, of course, come with appropriate compensation and flexible scheduling to accommodate James's ongoing care. I was speechless. Victoria Mitchell, who had once tried to buy me off for $200,000 to leave her son, was now proposing creating positions for both of us. Why? I finally asked. She looked momentarily confused. Why what? Why would you do this? You spent our entire relationship trying to get rid of me. You called me a gold digger at our wedding. Now you want to create a job for me? Victoria's expression tightened, but she didn't immediately dismiss my question, as she once would have. I was wrong about you, she said finally, the words clearly difficult for her. Not about everything. You and James still come from very different worlds, and that creates challenges. But I was wrong about your motivations. You've proven that over the past year. She met my eyes directly. I still may not entirely approve of you as my daughter-in-law, but I respect what you've done for my son. It wasn't an apology, but from Victoria, it was significant. Before I could respond, James returned to the table. What did I miss? He asked, looking between us. Victoria turned to him with a carefully neutral expression. I was just telling Elyse about the Foundation's plans for a new oncology clinic. Why don't you sit down, and I'll explain it to both of you. As she outlined her proposal to James, I watched his face transform with interest and then excitement. For the first time since his diagnosis, he was looking toward a future with purpose, not just survival. We'd need to work out the details, he said, his medical mind already engaged. Staffing, protocols, research partnerships? Of course, Victoria agreed. The Foundation would provide the funding and infrastructure, but the medical direction would be yours. Both of yours, she added, glancing at me. It was surreal. Sitting in Victoria Mitchell's dining room, discussing a professional partnership that would bind our lives together in ways none of us could have imagined before James's illness. Not friends, not even truly family yet, but something new. Allies in a cause that mattered to all of us. I'd need to think about it, I said carefully. Discuss it with James privately. Victoria nodded. Naturally. There's no rush. James needs to focus on his recovery first. As we prepared to leave, earlier than a normal dinner would end, but in deference to James's limited stamina, Victoria handed me a thick envelope. What's this? I asked. Information about the Mitchell Family Trust, she replied. I've had it restructured to include provisions for James's ongoing medical care and for your financial security, regardless of what happens with the clinic proposal. I frowned. What do you mean, my financial security? Something flashed in her eyes. Was it discomfort? In the event that James's condition should worsen, or should anything happen to him, you would be provided for. The house in Lake Oswego would be yours, along with a monthly stipend. The implication hit me like a physical blow. She was planning for James's possible death, preparing for a world where I would be his widow. He's in remission, I said sharply. The doctors are optimistic. Yes, they are, she agreed, her voice soft but firm. And I choose to believe them. But Richard's doctors were optimistic too at first. I learned the hard way that hope is not a financial strategy. I wanted to be angry at her pessimism, but there was a painful practicality to her planning that I couldn't entirely dismiss. AML was notorious for returning, often more aggressively than before. Take it, she urged as I hesitated. Read it. Discuss it with James when he's stronger. Or don't. Put it away and hope you never need it. But it's there. I took the envelope, feeling its weight, literal and metaphorical. Thank you, Victoria nodded once, briskly. You're welcome. She touched James's arm lightly. Rest tomorrow. Don't overdo it. As our car pulled away from the mansion, James reached for my hand. That went better than I expected. I squeezed his fingers gently, the envelope heavy in my purse. Yes, it did. What I didn't say was that beneath Victoria's newfound respect and practical assistance, I sensed something that worried me more than her previous hostility ever had. Fear. Victoria Mitchell was afraid of losing her son, of being alone, of a future she couldn't control with her money or influence. And I was beginning to suspect that fear would shape all our lives in ways we couldn't yet imagine. It wasn't until 2 years later, when Victoria suffered the stroke that would change everything, that I truly understood the depth of that fear and the lengths to which it would drive her. By then, James and I were running the Mitchell Oncology Center. My relationship with Victoria had settled into a cool but functional partnership, and the world seemed almost normal again. But normal was about to shatter in ways none of us could have predicted, and the battle lines drawn at our wedding would reform around an entirely different kind of power struggle, one that would eventually lead me to the moment I never expected: signing the ownership papers for Pine Meadows Luxury Senior Living, with Victoria Mitchell's name at the top of the resident list. Victoria's stroke happened during a foundation board meeting. One moment, she was articulating budget projections for the oncology center. The next, her words slurred and she collapsed. By the time James and I arrived at the hospital, the damage had been assessed: a massive cerebrovascular accident affecting her left hemisphere. She would live, but the Victoria Mitchell who awakened was dramatically changed from the woman who had ruled Portland society for decades. The right side of her body was partially paralyzed. Her speech came haltingly, words tangling as she struggled to communicate. Most devastating for a woman defined by control was the cognitive impact: memory gaps, emotional lability, impaired decision-making. The neurologist was gentle but firm. Victoria would need long-term care and supervision. "I can stay with her," James offered immediately. "We can hire home nurses." I touched his arm gently. "James, you're still in remission, but your immune system is compromised. Your mother will need rehabilitation, physical therapy, environments with lots of potential infections." "I can't just abandon her to some facility," he protested. "Not just any facility," I assured him. "We'll find the best." That search led us to Pine Meadows Luxury Senior Living, the most exclusive care facility in Oregon. Set on manicured grounds with views of the mountains, it offered private suites, gourmet dining, and specialized rehabilitation services, all for $12,000 per month, none of it covered by insurance. Victoria hated it on site. "Not going," she managed, glaring from her hospital bed. "Mother, it's the best facility in the state," James reasoned. "They have specialists who can help you recover." "My house," she insisted. "Home." But her doctors were adamant. Victoria couldn't safely return to her multi-level mansion with its steep staircases and isolated location. She needed constant monitoring, daily therapy, and immediate access to medical care. In the end, we had no choice. Victoria Mitchell, who had once commanded rooms with her presence, was wheeled into Pine Meadows, protesting as best her damaged speech would allow. The director, Mr. Patterson, welcomed her with the practiced warmth of someone used to reluctant residents. "Mrs. Mitchell, we're honored to have you join our community. I assure you we'll make your stay as comfortable as possible." Victoria's withering glare lost none of its power despite her condition. For 2 months we visited daily, watching her progress through grueling therapy sessions. Her speech improved incrementally, and she regained some mobility, though she would always need a walker. What didn't improve was her attitude. She fired 3 private nurses, reduced an aide to tears, and flatly refused to participate in group activities. "She's isolating herself," James worried. "The therapists say social interaction is crucial for cognitive recovery." Mr. Patterson pulled us aside after one particularly difficult visit. I understand Mrs. Mitchell's frustration, but her behavior is becoming disruptive. Several residents have complained. What are you saying? I asked. He smiled apologetically. Just that if things continue this way, Pine Meadows may not be the right fit for your mother-in-law. Perhaps a facility with more specialized behavioral management. The implication was clear. Shape up or be transferred to somewhere less luxurious, less exclusive, less Victoria. When we relayed this to Victoria, something unexpected happened. She laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Of course, she managed. Money. Talks. When I'm useful, everyone bows. Now, they want rid of me. The bitter truth in her words struck me. Victoria had spent a lifetime using wealth to control her world. Now, experiencing vulnerability for the first time, she was discovering what happened when that control slipped. One rainy afternoon, as James was meeting with her doctors, I sat alone with Victoria in her suite. She was having a good day, her speech clearer. "Why do you still come?" she asked abruptly. "James, I understand. You don't have to. Your family," I replied simply. She made a dismissive gesture. "Never treated you like family." "No," I agreed. "You didn't. Called you gold digger at your wedding." The memory still stung. "Yes, you did." She looked out the window at the rain. "Was wrong. You stayed. When money couldn't help him, I would have given everything. You gave yourself." It was as close to an apology as Victoria Mitchell would ever come. A month later, we received the call that would change everything. Mr. Patterson, sounding uncharacteristically nervous, requested an urgent meeting. When we arrived, he wasn't alone. The facility's owner, an elderly man named Gerald Simmons, sat behind the desk. "The situation is unfortunate," Mr. Simmons began without preamble. "Pine Meadows has been my life's work, but health considerations force me to sell. The buyers are a healthcare conglomerate with different priorities." "What does that mean?" "For the residents?" James asked. "Most services will continue, but certain amenities will be reduced, and fees will increase by approximately 40%. I gasped. "That's an additional $5,000 per month. The new owners understand some residents may need to relocate," Mr. Simmons said smoothly. "They're prepared to assist with transfers." After the meeting, James paced our kitchen. "I can't move her again. The disruption would set back her recovery significantly." "The foundation can cover the increased costs," I pointed out. "That's not the point. It's the principle. They're exploiting vulnerable people who can't easily leave." Something clicked in my mind. "When is the sale finalizing?" 3 weeks. Why? I made a quick calculation. Between James's trust fund, my savings from the oncology center, and a line of credit against our home, we might just have enough. "What if we bought it?" I suggested. James stared at me. "Buy Pine Meadows? Elyse, that's possible," I finished. "The Mitchell Foundation could be the primary investor, with us as managing partners. We'd maintain the quality of care without price gouging." 2 days later, we sat before Mr. Simmons with a counteroffer. 3 weeks of intense negotiations followed, during which I learned more about healthcare regulations and business financing than I ever imagined. The final paperwork arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 5 years to the day after our wedding. I signed my name with a steady hand. Elyse Mitchell, owner to our managing director. That afternoon, I visited Victoria. Her room overlooked the garden, spring flowers beginning to bloom. She turned as I entered, her face questioning. "It's done," I said, placing the ownership papers on her table. "Pine Meadows is now owned by the Mitchell Family Trust. with James and me as operating partners. She studied the documents with her still sharp eyes, understanding dawning. "You bought my nursing home?" "Yes." "Why?" I sat across from her. "Initially, to protect you and the other residents from exploitation, but I realized something along the way. This place matters. Not just to you, but to everyone here. They deserve dignity, respect, and excellent care, regardless of their conditions." Victoria was silent for a long moment. "From gold digger to owner," she finally said, a hint of her old irony returning. "Life has strange turns." "Indeed it does. Will you fire me as resident?" The question held an unexpected vulnerability. Shook my head. "This is your home for as long as you want it to be. Nothing changes for you, except perhaps the food. The chef has agreed to add a few of your favorites to the menu." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, gratitude, and perhaps a touch of respect. "Thank you," she said simply. As I left that day, I reflected on our journey. Victoria Mitchell had once called me a gold digger, believing I'd married her son for money and status. Now, in life's strange alchemy, I owned the facility where she would spend her remaining years. Not out of revenge, but because circumstances had revealed strengths in me she never anticipated, and perhaps a capacity for compassion I hadn't fully recognized in myself. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected packages, not as vengeance, but as the natural consequence of choosing who we become in the face of adversity. Victoria had chosen pride and control. I had chosen love and service. And in the end, those choices had led us both exactly where we needed to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.